Hi and welcome to my space. My name is Mariam. I like conversations, deep conversations about a wide range of topics, mostly about Africa, social justice, women empowerment, and travel because I'm just that girl. I hope you enjoy your time here. Let's get into it. I posted a video this week on all my socials condemning museums and calling them celebrations of European savagery. And I have not gotten that amount of comments on my posts in a number of months, to be honest. A lot of it was people getting enlightened. A lot of it was Africans who were agreeing with me and other people who were victims of colonialism. And then there were some very interesting comments. Some people were saying things like, "We keep them safe for you. Why are you living in Britain then? You're lucky they're in museums. We preserved them for you and future generations to beg harder for. Let us not pretend your ancestors' hands are soaking in blood too, lady. The only difference is we have the ability to build museums. Imagine having so little going on in your life that you're bothered by 2,000-year-old objects laying in museums." She is a Charomi. I have no idea what that word means. She doesn't know it. Well, then don't go in there, you stupid. And so on and so forth. There are hundreds of these comments on my posts. And not addressing the fact that I have quite a lot going on in my life right now, I want to talk about eurocentrism in this video. Specifically, I want to talk about how the Europeans convinced so much of the world that they are the centers of power. Now, if you don't know what eurocentrism is, I will read off a definition here so that we can get started. Eurocentrism has been variously defined as an attitude, conceptual apparatus, or set of empirical beliefs that frame Europe as the primary engine and architect of world history, the bearer of universal values and reason, and the pinnacle and therefore model of progress and development. Basically, the beginning and end of all good things and all right things and all virtuous things and all technologically advanced things is in Europe, according to this worldview. Now, it is understandable for Europeans to have this view because, of course, it is human nature. Everyone wants to believe that where they are from or where they belong to, anything, any allegiance they have is the best one. Otherwise, there would be no point in being part of that group. It's just human nature. I would say it's even part of animal nature, but I won't go that far. What I want us to talk about is how this came to be exported out to the rest of the world, specifically countries that are not even anywhere close to being white in nature. So I want us to go back to the beginning and really look at African history and what the Europeans did. So we all know that in 1884 there was a conference in Berlin, Germany. Me and you have issues. But anyway, in 1884, there was a conference in Berlin where 14 European nations and America decided to get together on a round table, or whatever table it was, and divide the continent of Africa. They'd never been there. They had no idea about any of the people there, or our customs, our empires, our political stances, nothing. They just knew there was this landmass that was wealthy, and they needed to exploit it. Now, as a business student, I know exactly what that was based off of. Colonialism was completely driven by capitalism. There is no other way around it. It was just a struggle for resources. It was a search to find where else could they get the raw goods and people that they needed to drive this engine of industry that was kicking off in Europe. And of course they had exploited all the people in their homelands, so they had to look elsewhere. India is far. It's just like distance-wise, India is far. But Africa was right there. Africa was close. Africa was untapped. And they knew only a little bit about what the borders of Africa were, based on the trade that they'd had over the centuries with African empires. They knew a little bit that there is wealth there is money there. They did not know, however, what was inside that continent. It was a black box to them. They had no idea what was inside. So this group of men, always men, they sit around this table and they decide to divide up this continent that is not theirs, that they have no claim to, without any African present. We see that today when we see how the UN makes decisions on certain countries. Palestine, without any Palestinians present. We see that today in how America and the UK and all these European countries make decisions on countries like Iran without any Iranians present. And even if they are present, then their will is disregarded. They did the same thing to Africa back then, but we did not even have, of course, the internet or any way to know what was happening thousands of miles away from us. So these men decide they're going to petition and section up this continent based on resources. Who would get what? Who needed what for their industry? This was the strategy they took. Now the problem is that most of us start African history there. And this is the problem, because we were not taught intentionally that Africa predates Europeans. Most of us, when we know about Africa, we start learning about Africa from that point, from the Petition of Africa. What this does is that it leaves our story in the hands of our conquerors, of our invaders, of our colonizers. And it is long overdue for Africans to take that story back and tell our own stories and make sure these stories are heard and correct this narrative that has been baked and marketed to the whole world, and that now even lives subconsciously within other Africans. This is what I want us to talk about in this conversation. So I'm going to take you back to before we even had Europeans setting foot and deciding that Africa was a dark continent, that they were going to divide it up and extract as much as they could from it. Let us go back and look at some of the different empires and dynasties and legacies that existed long before these white men decided to proclaim that Africa was a dark continent. I will start with my home in East Africa. In East Africa, we have a region called the Great Lakes region. And if you've been to Uganda, you know exactly what I'm talking about. We just have rivers and lakes flowing throughout the entire place. It created such a hub for stability for kingdoms. So we had dynasties that spanned centuries that cannot even be tracked to this day where the origin was. And in those kingdoms, the interlacustrine kingdoms is what they're called, there was a political system that was so advanced and so beyond the scope of what Europeans could imagine that when they finally got in there into the heart of Africa, as they call it, and they were able to observe how the kingdoms ran and how the kings ran their empires, they were so stunned that they started a rumor, and this still exists today, that these kingdoms could not have been made by black people. They were so steeped in their racism that they could not accept that this kind of order could have been made by black people. So they said that this must have been established by white Hamites from Ethiopia. And there is a whole other conversation to be had about how Ethiopians and people from that side of Africa see themselves as better than black Africans, but the British were so overwhelmed by this precision and this system and advancement that they did not expect, and they could not allow themselves to believe that this was the product of Africans. That is the first thing I want us to understand, that they already came in with their preconceptions and they were like, oh, there's nothing there. There's nothing there. But when they found a system that was working, where we had massive kingdoms that were spanning the entire heart of Africa, they could not bring themselves to accept it. This is how deep their racism was, and they saw themselves as the epicenter of the entire world, and that nothing else could add anything to their knowledge. Then we all know about the Kingdom of Benin. This is in present-day Nigeria. It was a wonder of a kingdom. It had such precise architecture in how the city, the capital city, was spread out. There were sections throughout the capital for different artisans. The goldsmiths were in one area, the blacksmiths were in another area, the Oba, the king's palace, was at the heart of the city, and then there was a council that dealt with everyday matters of the kingdom, from his marital relationships to running the different cities. We had systems in place while Europe was still trying to figure out how to get a sewage system running. We did not have those kinds of issues in our continent. I just found out about the Emperor Theodros of Abyssinia. This man was so in love with education that he set out to make sure that his empire was the seat of education in East Africa. He developed such a collection of books and of knowledge that when the British finally invaded, they needed over 40,000 animals. Do you know how many animals 40,000 animals are? Including over 40 elephants and over 40,000 people to just loot out his entire fortress, to clear it all out. And to make things even worse, once they attacked his fortress and murdered him and mutilated his body, they kidnapped his son and presented his son as a present to the Queen of England at the time. These are the people who are telling you that Africa was underdeveloped. One of my favorite kingdoms, and of course I'm biased, is the Dahomey Kingdom. This kingdom was known for the Mino, the Amazon, the African Amazons, who were the basis of the movie Woman King, the Warrior King, I think it was. What's the name of the movie? The Viola Davis movie. You guys know that movie. But this kingdom was such a force to be reckoned with. Their military precision really scared even the Europeans. The Portuguese used to trade with them because these women were elite. They were superior warriors. They did not fear. And most of them were volunteers because they were women who were hard-headed back in the day and they could not be controlled by their fathers or their husbands, or they were runaways, and they enlisted to join this army, this elite fighting force that protected the king. These were the Mino. These were the women who protected the king of the Dahomey. And then the French came. And they ransacked that entire kingdom and burnt everything and looted everything they could. But because the king was so proud of his heritage and of his artifacts and of his kingdom, he would rather have seen them get burnt to a crisp than let the French take them away. So he set fire to his entire palace. Of course, some of it survived, and what survived was looted by the French. But the Mino did not give up. They still, even after defeat, they still carried out covert missions to make sure that they would completely humiliate their colonizers. I can't say the word I'm thinking, so we'll just say colonizers. The Ashanti Kingdom in Ghana was such a rich kingdom that almost every single European colonizer fought over it. There was so much gold coming out of Ghana that it was incomprehensible to Europeans that they could leave this fortune behind. They could not stand it. So one after the other, they tried to attack the kingdom, and they kept being repelled until finally the British unleashed a legion on that kingdom because they were so greedy and they could not leave that wealth in the hands of these savages, of these underdeveloped people who could not and weren't capable of making the most out of it. So the British attacked the Ashanti Kingdom in Ghana. They raided and they took thousands and thousands of kilos of gold. And to make things even worse, they charged that kingdom of Ashanti with a debt for resisting the British rule and the British conquest. And so they went away and they came back and they attacked it again to settle the debt. Are we seeing this? Are we all hearing the same kinds of stories? The Nubian kingdom that predated Egypt. I know right now we talk about Egypt and it's the first place everyone talks about. People talk about, oh, I've been to Africa. You usually hear people say, either Egypt or South Africa. Personally, they don't count to me because I'm just like, that's Africa light. I don't really believe that. No shade, right? But I'm just like, it doesn't really count. So I don't want to talk about the empires of Egypt. I feel like that has been overdone, and I feel like there's nothing interesting I can add to that. But I do want to talk about the Nubian kingdom. That was a kingdom. Before the birth of Christ, in this current era that we're in, that kingdom spanned, covering all the way up to Egypt. And there was a state in the Nubian kingdom called Kush, which rivaled what we know about Egypt right now. The architecture that you see with the pyramids, the sphinxes, whatever you want to call it, Kush was far superior to Egypt than that. These are not the stories that we hear when we talk about Africa and Sudan and everything. And speaking of Sudan, we need to talk about the gold. Right now, yes, we know that the UAE is fighting for the gold in Sudan. But did you know that before the Europeans discovered that section of Africa, they had a thriving gold trade? A very, very intricate and precise and fair method of trading gold that when the Europeans finally found them, they couldn't make sense of it. These are people that knew this innately, and their system was so advanced and so innate to them that it needed no words, it needed no subterfuge and underhandedness. No, they knew exactly what they had because this had been developed over centuries before the British got there, before the Europeans even knew how to do any of this. We don't talk enough about how much education that we had in the continent, written and oral, and how much tradition that we valued in our communities, in our kingdoms, in our empires, before the British came and stole all of that away from us. I don't think it's talked about. Honestly, I wasn't taught these things when I was a child, and there was no priority given to nurturing that sense of pride as an African and letting us know that we were here long before these invaders came. They do not get to tell us our history. And it just started from maybe knowing the kingdoms in your country and then knowing maybe the tribal groups that you belong to. And that was it. So when we as Africans don't tell our stories, this is what happens. Number one, our children grow up idolizing what they see. And of course, America is a superpower in marketing. There is no comparison of when it comes to marketing. America literally wrote a book on how to market. And because they've pushed it so hard and they've pushed it so far into the world, when we don't grow up with knowledge of who we are as Africans, then we idolize them because we only see what they show about their people. And unfortunately, most Africans will never get the chance to come out and actually see these countries and go like, oh, we grew up with an inferiority complex where we idolize people who are not us because we think they're doing better. We think they're more technologically developed. We think that they have everything together. And we don't know that, wait a minute, we had all of this before they did. They just came here and then they stole it from us. And they damaged everything we had so that they could say there was nothing here. And then position themselves as those who were bringing civilization and development to us. This is something that we need to combat. This is why we as Africans need to know our stories. Really and truly know our stories. And tell our children our stories. And tell our grandchildren their stories. Because they need to understand that they should not see their worth as less than because of these other people. That cannot be allowed to happen. The other thing that happens is what was happening in my continents. We have all these Europeans and white people and white adjacent people who have no idea what they're talking about, who have been fed propaganda their entire lives. Their entire lives they've been marketed to and been told, you were the good people. Your ancestors went there to take civilization and Christianity and to bring modernization to these savages. We were not the savages. We were far ahead technologically, politically, we had our own systems that worked for us, and they worked in a way that was stable and sustainable and not exploitative of the environments that we lived in. They worked great. We were not the ones who threw the system out of balance. So that's another effect of not knowing African history, of not knowing true African history. The third effect that I've noticed is how this impacts people who are both not Africans and who are not Europeans. So let's say people like, I made a video about India, so let's just say people in India. China is a lot more educated, so I'll not pick on them. Let's say people in India. You have them looking down at Black Africans because of what they've internalized and because of what they've seen of Africa. And it's just, first of all, no, it's not right. But second of all, why would you trust people who enslaved your people and starved your people about what they say about other people? How does this make sense? How does this make any kind of sense? It makes absolutely no sense at all. The last manifestation that I want to talk to, I lived in the States for a while, and I could see how the African Americans there had a perception of Africa and Africans that was completely sold to them by whiteness. A lot of them had never really had a full-on conversation with another African, and there's a whole lot of history there that I will address later on, but because of their preconceived notions and because of what they ingested and what they had internalized, even though they had this desire to go back to the motherland, as Marcus Garvey said, or whoever else had this idea of returning to Africa, they still looked down on Africans. And they couldn't see the cognitive dissonance that was happening there. You claim these are the people who are from the home that you want to return to, but you have the mentality of the white man when it comes to them. And Malcolm X talked about this amazingly in his own book, where he said even though his father was one of those who followed the teachings of Garvey, and he idolized and he idealized Africa, like the place they would all go back to, he still, Malcolm himself, thought of Africans as nothing more than savages and trees and this kind of thing. Later on in his life, of course, he did not think that, and he went through a period of growth. But this is the same thing that eurocentrism does to African Americans. Now, alhamdulillah, it's getting better. Shout out to Dirty December, and Afrofest and all these different activities that are inviting the diaspora back to come and experience Africa and to revise their preconceptions. Shout out to social media, because a lot of people would never ever have revised their stances on Africa if not for social media, if not for people like Speed and his African tour, where he exposed so many African Americans to Africa. They would never ever have an idea of what is in the continent. They would just not know. So yeah, when it comes to the topic of Eurocentrism and seeing how it has been pushed, I want us to all be a little bit more critical in how we look at this, and how to just examine what we believe about Africa. Who told you these stories? Have you met an African? Have you been there before? How many countries have you been there? Just ask yourselves these questions, and let's all just do a little bit better. A little bit, and just be a little bit more critical, and use some critical thinking when we talk about Africa. Thanks for hanging around. I had fun. For now, I will leave you with this quote that I read in one of my favorite books, Africa is Not a Country by Dipo Faloyan, and it is a remarkable book if you want to just start learning about Africa and deconstructing some of the things that you've been told through all your life that are actual lies about the continent. It is understandably hard to imagine how a single Instagram post can break a region, until you appreciate that it's not about a single photo, but the cumulative effect of having these perceptions continually regurgitated, with multiple generations in the West growing up with the same paternalistic relationship with the continent, adding their own wooden pieces to a mosaic too ingrained in the collective subconscious to easily break apart. Preconceived perceptions breed discrimination. When Africans travel the world, we are forced to carry on our backs the same bigoted assumptions that we are coming from poverty, with relatives living in the mud huts waiting for handouts from the West. Thanks for hanging out with me. I'll be back again next time. Subscribe, and I'll see you then.